The final notes of Maya's song lingered in the air, settling over the stunned restaurant like a heavy fog. For a moment, everything stood still. Then, a single fork clattered against a plate, breaking the silence. It was as if the entire room had just woken from a trance. Whispered murmurs spread through the tables. Some people exchanged glances. Others simply stared at Maya as if seeing her for the first time. Maya let out a slow breath and lifted her hands from the keys, her pulse still racing. She felt exposed, as if she had just revealed something deeply personal to a crowd of strangers. And in a way she had, but she didn't regret it. Across the room, Langston sat motionless, his expression unreadable. His friends, who had been laughing moments ago, now looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats, unsure of what to say. One of them cleared his throat and forced out an awkward chuckle. "Didn't see that coming," he muttered under his breath. Langston's jaw tightened. He had expected a joke, something he could mock, something to entertain his table. Instead, he had been caught off guard, humbled in a way he wasn't used to. His pride wouldn't let him admit it, but Maya had just shattered every assumption he had made about her. Maya pushed back from the piano, ready to return to her duties, but before she could take a step, a slow, deliberate clap rang out. Langston. The applause was slow at first, almost mocking, but there was something else beneath it, something uncertain. The sound of his hands meeting filled the quiet room, drawing even more attention to him. Then, others joined in. A few hesitant claps, then more, until the restaurant was filled with genuine applause. Maya felt her face grow warm. She wasn't used to this kind of attention. Langston leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Where did you learn to play like that?" he asked, his voice quieter now, more curious than condescending. Maya hesitated. She wasn't sure she wanted to answer him, but something in his tone made her pause. "My mother taught me," she said finally, keeping her voice steady. Music was her dream. Langston studied her, and for the first time, there was no arrogance in his expression, just curiosity. But before Maya could say anything else, the restaurant manager appeared at her side, looking flustered. "Maya, a word in my office." "Now," he said under his breath. Maya's stomach tightened. She knew that tone. She knew what was coming. As she turned to follow him, she caught one last look at Langston. His eyes were still on her, unreadable. And for reasons she couldn't quite explain, she had the strange feeling that this night was far from over. Maya's footsteps were heavy as she followed the manager down the hallway, away from the dining area. Her heart pounded, and she clenched her fists to keep them from shaking. She knew how this would go. She had broken the rules, stepped out of line. No matter how well she played, she was still just a waitress in their eyes. The manager stopped outside his office, turning to face her with a sharp glare. "What were you thinking?" he hissed. "This is not some street corner for you to put on a show. You're here to serve, not entertain the guests." Maya swallowed the lump in her throat. She wanted to explain that she hadn't planned on playing, that she had only done it because Langston had forced her into it, but she knew it wouldn't matter. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. The manager sighed, rubbing his temples. "You embarrassed this restaurant," he muttered. "I should fire you on the spot." Maya stiffened. She needed this job. Rent was due. Bills were piling up. Losing it now would mean losing everything. Before she could plead her case, a voice interrupted from behind. That would be a mistake. Maya and the manager turned at the same time. Langston stood in the hallway, hands in his pockets, watching the exchange with an unreadable expression. The manager's face paled slightly. "Mr. Langston, I..." Langston lifted a hand, silencing him. "I was the one who asked her to play," he said smoothly. "Are you really going to punish her for doing what a paying customer requested?" The manager hesitated, his lips pressing into a thin line. He didn't want to argue with someone like Langston, a man with money, power, and influence. Maya watched in disbelief as the manager's posture shifted from authority to unease. Langston took a step closer, his eyes still on Maya. "She has talent," he said, almost to himself. real talent, and you have her carrying trays." Maya wasn't sure if that was an insult or a compliment, but she didn't get the chance to respond. Langston turned back to the manager. "I want to speak with her, privately." But then something shifted. Derek let out a slow breath and held up his hands in mock surrender. "Relax," he said, stepping back. "Just catching up with an old friend." He met Maya's eyes one last time, and though he was smiling, she could see the message beneath it. This wasn't over. Without another word, he turned and disappeared into the night. Maya exhaled, feeling the weight of everything settle over her. She had spent so long running from her past, trying to build something new, and just like that, it had caught up with her. Langston turned to her. "You okay?" She nodded, even though she wasn't sure. "I will be." He studied her for a long moment. Then quietly he said, "Whatever that was, you don't have to deal with it alone." Maya didn't know why, but those words hit deeper than she expected. She had been alone for so long, used to fighting her own battles. The idea that someone, especially someone like Langston, would stand beside her was unfamiliar. But maybe she didn't have to keep running. Just as she was about to thank him, Langston's phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at the screen, and something in his expression shifted. His jaw tightened slightly, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his face. "What is it?" Maya asked, suddenly uneasy. Langston hesitated, then turned the phone toward her. On the screen was a message, short, direct, and chilling. ***, you're not the only one with secrets ***. Maya's stomach dropped. She had thought tonight was about her past catching up to her, but now she realized something else. Langston had secrets of his own, and whatever they were about to change everything. Maya stared at the message, her pulse pounding. The words blurred in her mind, repeating over and over. Someone was watching. Someone knew something about Langston, about her, maybe about both of them. Langston's expression remained unreadable, but she could see it now. The tension in his jaw, the way his grip tightened around the phone. He wasn't just some rich guy throwing money around. He had his own shadows, his own past. Maya took a step back, suddenly unsure. "What does that mean?" she asked quietly. Langston exhaled, slipping the phone back into his pocket. He met her gaze, and for the first time since they met, there was no arrogance, no amusement, just honesty. "It means," he said slowly, "that I'm not the only one paying attention to you." A chill ran down her spine. "What?" Langston hesitated, then shook his head. "I'll explain, but not here." He glanced around, scanning the quiet alley. "Can I trust you, Maya?" Maya almost laughed at the absurdity of the question. Trust him? After everything. But then she thought about it, about how he had stood up for her, about how he had seen something in her when no one else had. So instead of answering, she simply nodded. Langston studied her for a moment before giving a small, almost reluctant smile. "Good," he murmured. The weight in her chest lifted slightly, but the uncertainty still lingered. Everything had changed tonight. She had stepped into a spotlight she hadn't asked for. She had confronted a past she thought she'd escaped. And now, standing in the cool night air with Langston watching her, like she was part of something bigger than she realized, she knew one thing for certain: this was only the beginning. Maya took a deep breath. She had spent years running, hiding from the parts of herself that she was too afraid to face. But maybe it was time to stop. Maybe it was time to take control of her own story. She glanced at Langston. "So, what now?" Langston's smirk returned, but this time it was different. Less of a game, more of a challenge. "Now," he said, stepping beside her. "Now we find out who's really watching." And with that, they walked into the night, side by side, ready to face whatever came next. It was supposed to be a normal evening out. J.D. Vance, the senator from Ohio, had just wrapped up a long day and was looking forward to a quiet meal at a popular restaurant. Nothing fancy, just a place to sit down, relax, and grab a bite. But what happened next took everyone by surprise. As he stepped inside, The atmosphere felt different. There was a tension in the air, almost like the staff had been expecting him, but not in a good way. A hostess approached, but instead of leading him to a table, she hesitated. Then, with a forced smile, she said something that instantly changed the mood. "I'm sorry, but we can't serve you here tonight." For a moment, there was silence. The people nearby, some already seated, some waiting for their turn, turned their heads. J.D. Vance stood there, processing what he had just heard. He wasn't causing a scene. He wasn't being disruptive. He had just walked in like any other customer. So why was he being turned away? At first he thought it was a mistake. Maybe a reservation issue. Maybe they were short on staff. But as the seconds passed, it became clear. This wasn't about logistics. This was personal. The hostess, though trying to keep her voice steady, looked uncomfortable, like she had been instructed to say those words. Vance asked the obvious question, "Why?" Again, hesitation. She glanced toward the manager standing a few feet away. The manager didn't step forward, didn't explain. Instead, they simply watched. And then, under her breath, the hostess admitted, "It's because of who you are." Now, the air grew even thicker. Whispers rippled through the restaurant. Some diners put down their forks, others pulled out their phones, sensing something big was unfolding. J.D. Vance, a sitting U.S. senator, was being denied service, not because of a reservation issue, not because the place was full, but because of his identity, his politics. For a brief second, you could see it in his face, shock, maybe a bit of disappointment. After all, isn't America built on the idea that people, no matter their differences, should be able to coexist, to share a meal without politics getting in the way? But then something unexpected happened. Instead of arguing, instead of raising his voice or calling for a boycott, J.D. Vance did something that caught everyone off guard. He took a deep breath, straightened his posture, and, well, what he did next left the entire restaurant stunned. And trust me, you won't believe what happened after that. Stay tuned. J.D. Vance stood there for a moment, his face unreadable. The restaurant had fallen into an eerie silence, with nearly every eye in the room locked on him. A few people whispered to each other, their expressions ranging from confusion to disbelief. Others just watched, waiting to see how he would react. He wasn't a stranger to criticism. Politics, after all, is a battleground. People disagree, they argue, they take sides. But being turned away from a restaurant, that was different. That wasn't a debate on the Senate floor or a heated exchange on social media. This was real life, happening in real time, and the weight of it pressed down on the entire room. The hostess, clearly uncomfortable, shifted nervously. She wasn't the one making the rules, that much was obvious. Her hands gripped the podium tightly, and she avoided direct eye contact. The manager, still standing a few feet away, seemed unsure whether to step in or stay back. It was as if no one expected J.D. Vance to actually show up that night, and now that he had, they weren't sure how to handle it. Vance finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. "So, you're saying I can't eat here because of my politics?" The hostess hesitated again. It wasn't a question she wanted to answer. Finally, she said, "It's just, we've had complaints. Some people don't feel comfortable." There it was. Not a firm policy, not a written rule, just complaints. From who? Customers? Staff? No one was saying. The reasoning was vague, but the decision had already been made. The restaurant doors swung open, and a couple walked in, laughing about something before they realized a strange scene in front of them. They stopped short, looking around, trying to figure out what was going on. Others in the restaurant had pulled out their phones, subtly recording from behind menus or half-full glasses of wine. This was a moment that wasn't going to stay quiet for long. Vance looked around the room, his eyes scanning the faces watching him. Some seemed uncomfortable, unsure of where they stood. A few people looked smug, like they approved of what was happening. But there were also others, people who looked just as shocked as he was. A man near the bar, middle-aged with a weathered face, leaned forward slightly, like he wanted to say something but wasn't sure if he should. A woman at a nearby table gave Vance an apologetic look, shaking her head slightly as if to say, asterisk, this isn't right, asterisk. The clinking of silverware and low hum of conversation filled the upscale restaurant, where waiters in crisp uniforms moved swiftly between tables. Among them was Maya, a young waitress with tired eyes but a warm smile, working tirelessly to make ends meet. She had been serving tables here for months, always staying in the background, unnoticed by the wealthy patrons who dined under the soft glow of chandeliers. But tonight was different. Seated in the center of the restaurant was Mr. Langston, a powerful businessman known for his arrogance. He laughed loudly with his associates, enjoying their expensive meals without a care in the world. His sharp eyes scanned the room until they landed on Maya, and something about her caught his attention. Maybe it was the way she carried herself with quiet dignity or the exhaustion in her steps. Whatever it was, a smirk tugged at his lips as an idea formed in his mind. "Hey, you," he called out, snapping his fingers. Maya turned, startled. She hurried over, forcing a polite smile. "Yes, sir, is there something I can get you?" she asked. Langston leaned back in his chair, swirling his wine glass. "I hear you play the piano," he said, his voice laced with amusement. His friends chuckled, already sensing where this was going. Maya hesitated. She hadn't played in public in years, not since her childhood dreams of being a musician were buried under the weight of reality. How did he even know? She glanced at the restaurant's grand piano in the corner, its polished keys gleaming under the dim lighting. I used to," she admitted, keeping her voice steady. Langston's smirk widened. "Great. Play something for us," he said, but his tone wasn't a request. It was a challenge. The table erupted in quiet laughter, waiting to see her fumble, expecting nothing more than a nervous attempt. Maya's heart pounded. Every part of her wanted to walk away, to refuse, but something deep inside told her not to back down. Taking a shaky breath, she stepped toward the piano. The restaurant grew quiet as all eyes followed her, waiting, watching. She placed her fingers on the keys, and in that moment, the world around her faded. Then she began to play. What happened next left the entire room speechless, including the man who had mocked her. Maya's fingers trembled for just a moment as they hovered over the keys. She could feel the weight of every stare in the restaurant, the quiet murmurs of curiosity, the smirks of doubt. But the second she pressed the first note, something shifted. The rich, soulful sound filled the air, silencing even the clinking of glasses. Her hands moved instinctively, gliding over the piano as if they had never stopped playing. The melody she played wasn't just music, it was a story, one filled with pain, resilience, and something else, something deeper. It was the sound of years of struggle, of sacrifices made in silence, of dreams put on hold. The room that had moments ago been filled with quiet laughter now sat frozen in shock. Langston, who had been leaning back with his arms crossed, straightened in his seat. His smirk faded, replaced with something unreadable. His friends exchanged looks, their amusement turning into something closer to disbelief. Maya's eyes remained closed as she played, lost in the music. She wasn't performing for them. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. This was for her, the part of her that had been silenced, ignored, buried under the weight of bills and exhaustion. But now it was alive again, pouring out through every note, filling every corner of the restaurant. The waitstaff had stopped moving, some peeking from behind the counters, stunned by the hidden talent of the quiet girl they worked alongside every day. Even the diners, people who had come expecting nothing more than an expensive meal and shallow conversation, were mesmerized. Langston's fingers tapped lightly against the table, but not out of boredom, out of nerves. He wasn't used to being wrong, but he could feel it creeping in, unsettling him. He had expected hesitation, a clumsy attempt at impressing him. Instead, he got something raw, something powerful. He studied Maya closely, as if seeing her for the first time. Who was this girl? And why had someone with that kind of talent been hiding in the background, waiting tables? The song built, the notes swelling with emotion. The tension in the air was thick, pressing down on everyone in the room. Maya didn't notice. She was somewhere else, lost in the music, lost in a memory she had tried so hard to forget. Then, without warning, she opened her eyes and met Langston's gaze. And for the first time in a long time, the powerful man who always had control found himself speechless.